People always think we're attacking NASA, and we're actually NASA enthusiasts when it comes right down to it, right? We're space enthusiasts. We want accountability. We want disclosure. We want to see what's actually there, and we will accept the limitation. We'll support the limitations on what's capable of doing. We don't need to keep researching in and find out, oh, all we're looking at is CGI. If you can't do it, say so.
I mean, we're looking at this gateway, and we're thinking, okay, it took, I believe, 10 years to put the space station together. The lunar station, it has 3 modules on it, and it has 4 airlocks. Now, how long do you think that's going to take for them to get that launched? Is they're going to take one module at a time? They're going to have to get into translunar injection, get into the lunar orbit, place that station there, module per module, which means that they're going to work on this, get it up and running, pressurized, and so that they can work inside of it. And then they're going to have to get back in the ship and go back and pick up another one. Or they're going to have to stay there while another ship with another module comes, and then they're going to have to sit there for weeks waiting for it to assemble it. How long do you think that's going to take? And that's not even including getting the solar panels up or anything like that. It still all has to be connected. They think that they're going to be inhabiting this station in 2 years, because I believe that's when they're supposed to send people to the moon, right?
Yeah, it's taking 2 years to get the next rocket off the ground.
Yeah, the biggest problem is because they have to do a translunar injection. They need all of that extra fuel, so their weight capability to get there is way down. I mean, these modules, when they send them, are going to be completely empty. Then they have to assemble piece by piece, like each one. It won't be just 3 trips out there with them. It's probably going to be 10 or 15 or 20.
And that's assuming that they get them into the right orbits. So get the first one into the orbit, and then the second one comes along and it's in a different orbit. So they're going to have to try and put them together. Well, that's going to take a lot of fuel, which they haven't got, so they have to send another rocket up with the fuel. I mean, it's a crazy idea. It really is.
And then, of course, it's going to be permanently manned.
Yep. So they're going to have rockets going up all the time.
They have to have one at least every month. The amount that they're going to be able to carry there is minimal.
And also they've got to then dock with it when they find it, which may be quite a straightforward operation. If you see what happens on the ISS, that's quite straightforward. Even dock unmanned craft there as well, or unmanned rockets.
But half the physical craft is being taken up with airlocks.
You have 4 airlocks, 1 on each side, and then you have 2 on the ends, 1 on each end.
It's crazy. Airlocks in space haven't really been used that much. At least not that I'm aware of. Maybe on the ISS they use them. But these are things which are going to take a lot of training, a lot of practice.
Now, how are you going to seal it every time?
Good point. I don't know.
I mean, listen to Bill. One-time only seals.
I mean, they obviously use something like that on the ISS, because they must have airlocks on the ISS. When the astronauts go out to do their EVAs, they presumably then can use that airlock. Maybe it's a specially created one. Maybe it's something that they're trained to use. But then, of course, the ISS is at a much different level of vacuum than it would be at the moon.
You can't even test the equipment out.
As Bill explained, you can't use rubber seals at that level of vacuum. You've got to use metal seals, one time only.
Oh, that's right, because the ISS is not as far off, so it's in a less harsh vacuum.
Yeah.
But when those guys are around the moon and they put that into orbit, now they're going to be dealing with a vacuum level of torr 10 to the minus 11. So they're really going to have to put some beefy structure in that.
I wonder if they've got a repair kit if things go wrong.
Oh, you're not going to be plugging the hole up with your thumb.
That's true.
Well, that's an absolute joke. That's like the hole in the glove. By the way, Robert, the one thing that was being commented about was the rover and the dust coming up off the rover in one of the comments, right?
Yes, he said that it should swirl because of the wind.
He said if it was in an atmosphere, you'd see all of the swirling and everything else, right? That regolith, if you want to call it that, was fairly heavily wetted down. There is no fine dust coming off the back of that rover. It's more like sand coming off. And you realize the wheels are like sieves, so that the dirt can actually get inside the wheel and then get kicked out. And then you realize billions of years of cosmic dust that would be on the lunar surface, and the photoelectric charge attached to it. If you kick it up, it's going to stay there. It's not going to come back down until the sun goes off of it. It's going to stay there. That actual track would just leave a cloud of very fine dust that's going to hang there the entire length of your trip. It's not coming back down. That photoelectric charge, it can levitate on its own without being disturbed.
Well, I think it would stay there for a longer period of time than what they're showing here.
Oh, it just goes up and down. There's nothing. It's just like sand. There is no fine dust in the set that they designed for the lunar surface. If there is fine dust in there, it's wetted down.
Or it was mixed with a bit of oil when they set it down in the first place.
Yeah, they prepared it. If that was just regular rubber tires on there, it wouldn't kick any of it up. The only reason why that is being shot up there is because the wire mesh wheels are creating a sieve that are kicking it up.
It's a very strange idea that that is the objection that people come up with, because the dust is not behaving the way they think it should.
There's no real dust. If you see a car driving down a gravel road that's dry and is dusty, and these people are expecting it to pick up and swirl around like that if it's in an atmosphere, they've wetted that down. There isn't that fine dust. You don't see it anywhere there. And those wheels in particular would really pick it up. You've got a sieve there.
I've been watching the Dakar Rally, and some of the shots show them driving through some really quite dusty areas, desert areas. And the clouds of dust that are kicked up just by the cars, not the trucks, just by the cars, stays there until the next car comes along. I mean, that could be a couple of minutes later. So you've got this huge cloud of dust. It's not sand that's been kicked up, it's dust. And it stays in the atmosphere. I mean, this is on Earth. It just stays as a sort of trail of dust. You can see where the cars are miles ahead because they've got this plume of dust behind them. So the idea that this is different from the moon is ridiculous. On the moon, it'd be much worse. Anything moving around on the moon, like these lunar rovers we're told were there, will kick up so much dust they'd disappear. You wouldn't be able to film them.
That's right, and it would just hang there. That photoelectric charge that levitates is going to keep it there a long time. Even when they're walking around, they should be kicking that up.
Of course they should. I mean, this is, as you say, millions of years old. It's the sort of continual rain onto the lunar surface. Happens here on Earth as well, but we don't notice it because it disappears in the ground.
We get rain, we get wind, we get everything else. On the lunar surface, every shot you see is an error in simulation when you see a bare rock, because they would not be bare.
They'd be covered in dust. If they've been there for as long as we're told that the rocks have been there on the moon, you'd expect them to be literally a gentle covering of dust. And if they get hit by another meteor or hit by another rock coming in from somewhere, which comes in very fast, it would spray the dust up everywhere. So it would cover everything again.
You just don't have cosmic dust coming in.
No.
You have meteor impact on there, and all of that's going to be there. And when the sun hits it and levitates it, the finest dust is the stuff that's coming up and will settle down. So it's actually giving a gradient layer to how fine the grain is of the dust. It's going to be always on top because of that photoelectric charge, pulling it up and then setting it back down.
The Gateway Lunar Station, I still think there's going to be a problem, because where is the radiation protection for that station?
They don't mention it at all. There are two things that are never mentioned by NASA. One is the radiation protection beyond the Van Allen belts against CMEs, coronal mass ejections, against galactic cosmic rays, and against solar flares. That's not mentioned. And the other thing is vacuum, the effect of vacuum. We saw the launch in the UK of the Virgin Launcher 1, but got up and then failed. Didn't reach orbit. It wasn't going fast enough because the third stage didn't ignite. Well, what's going on there? Why didn't it ignite? Was it vacuum that was causing a problem again? Was it radiation? No, it's not highly unlikely to be radiation because they'd know about that. They'd create the craft in a way that could be protected from it. It's only in Earth orbit anyway. It's when you get out towards the moon, beyond the Van Allen belts, 25,000 miles out, then you start getting real problems. That's why nobody's been there. No humans have been there. It's becoming a very hot area now. This idea that vacuum has serious problems which have not been addressed, let alone overcome, because it's a major scientific subject. I mean, this is not conspiracy or anything like that. This is basic science. Vacuum has properties. As Bill said when you explained it, if you get a vacuum chamber, you're going to have pressure on the inside because of the atmosphere outside. So you've got to account for that. And that's what you have to do on spacesuits. You've got to account for the pressure difference between the atmosphere inside a spacesuit for £5 per square inch, which doesn't sound much, but when you start multiplying it up by the size of a spacesuit, it starts increasing. It's about a ton per square meter. I mean, that's a lot. That's the pressure inside the spacesuit, which has to be contained because there's a vacuum outside. You've got the vacuum outside. You've got to be able to have this differential between the pressure inside and the vacuum outside. And it starts adding up. £4 per square inch, not very much. But there are 900 square inches in a square yard. It's a lot. It starts to get into the level of tons of pressure. Not pounds per square inch, but tons per square yard. When you start getting it to that level, you've got an engineering problem to overcome. How do you maintain the difference between the two? I think Bill explained it very well. He made the points about the pressure. He made the points about the sheer integrity required in a vacuum chamber to maintain the vacuum. And this is stainless steel that we're talking about here, maintaining a relatively low level of vacuum. When you start getting out to the moon, you're doing it hundreds of times harder. It's 100 times harder vacuum than it is inside a laboratory equipment, but it's a logarithmic scale. They're not addressing it. NASA do not address this problem at all. They don't discuss it because there are many implications resulting from it. And any testing they do underwater. That's not the same thing at all. Come on, NASA, you've got to get your act together if you're going to get out into the moon.
There's also the volume of the vacuum that you have in a laboratory, right?
Yep.
He's talking about you're creating a vacuum in a very small area, and of course that vacuum is going to drop when you're off-gassing stuff in there. When you're in outer space, the vacuum is endless.
Yeah, but the way that NASA is displaying this to the world is what they're doing is they're saying, in effect, that vacuum in a chamber and vacuum that we find in space are two different animals. Because when you have a spacesuit in a vacuum chamber on Earth, now you need a structure. But as soon as you get out to space, you do not need a structure. It makes no sense. Water's going to boil or outgas in a chamber here, and it's going to do the same thing when you get to space. Yep. And it's the same thing with everything in a vacuum. And one guy left a comment on the other channel, it's the same. But you guys are saying that it's not the same. And he says, well, who said that? I said, well, ask the rest of the birdie bunch, because that's what they pretty much are claiming, that, it's only one atmosphere. Yeah, if it's one atmosphere, but look at 1 square meter, you have 10,000 pounds that are knocking on your door trying to get out. Where's the structure? So the question becomes, is the vacuum the same in space as it is on Earth? That's what somebody really needs to ask NASA.
If NASA don't know the answer to that, they've got real problems. If they think that that is the case, the vacuum on Earth is different from the vacuum in space, forget it. They don't deserve the title of scientific organization. It's ludicrous. This is not even university science. This is high school science. Anybody who studied vacuum would know what the problems are. What's NASA doing about it? They appear to be avoiding discussing the subject at all, because if they did, they would have to admit that Apollo was faked. Because they're saying that this lander sat on the lunar surface with astronauts in it, in the vacuum of space surrounding it, and they put into that lander 4.8 pounds per square inch of atmospheric pressure to keep the astronauts alive. What would be required to contain that pressure within the lander? 2 levels of Reynolds wrap, we're told.
That's an absolute joke. I mean, they made such a mistake when they were talking about the LEM and the structure of the hull of the LEM. It's an absolute joke. Anybody that looks at any of those documentations, a few years ago, it was either the History Channel or the Discovery Channel. The Coke and Koch brothers did the stuff, and it was called Creative Labs. Creative Labs, now I can't find them anymore. Completely gone. This was a reproduction facility, and the name of it was Creative Labs, and it was out of Florida. And they did a reproduction of the spruce goose to put up as models. They did all kinds of other stuff for museum pieces on there. And I watched them do the lander on there, the LEM, to be put into a museum. And they would do any level of reproduction of the thing, from whether it's a styrofoam cutout stuff or right up to pretty much a full functioning machine. I cannot find it. If you Google Creative Labs, nothing. You'll get electronics, video cards and stuff like that. You will not find it on the Discovery Channel anywhere else. And I mean, I sat and watched them as they built the LEM. And they were talking about the legs on it. They were talking about the hull on it. They just used foil, mylar to do the hull, because they said that's exactly, they phoned NASA and said, how did you do the hull? Because they were building it to the exact specifications and weight of the machine. And I mean, I watched them do rockets. I watched them do old aircrafts, the old biplanes and stuff like that. Like I said, the Spruce Goose, completely out of spruce, full size.
It's a big plane, that.
I've stood beside that thing. It's massive.
And I mean, this company was doing that, and they were doing this for NASA on the thing. And I mean, that program, Creative Labs, was on the Discovery Channel. It was on the History Channel as well. But I used to watch those programs because it was interesting how they're reproducing all of this stuff, how they created the molds and all the other stuff that they were doing for it. But when I watched the Apollo one, you can't find it. You can't find it in the archives. You can Google it. You can do everything. You can go to the History Channel and try and see what their old programs are. Gone. Like they never existed.
It's like NASA are fully aware now that they've been caught out, but they can't admit it. They can't come clean and say, sorry, we had to do it the way we did it for various reasons. They can explain it. We'll understand it. But now that they keep just blocking, as you say, you can't find a lot of the information that used to be easily available. That really dates from around the 50th anniversary celebrations of Apollo. That was in 2019. Quite a lot of things just disappeared. Several films I'd done, several talks I'd given, just disappeared from the internet completely. Except now Robert has been able to archive them and they're available again, because we got the originals. But it's like NASA suddenly thought, we're going to put a lot of attention onto the Apollo program back in 2019, July 20th, which they did. There was a lot of films coming out, a film called Apollo 11, which I watched in the IMAX cinema to get the full immersive experience. God, that was a waste of time. 2 hours I won't get back again. But NASA suddenly realized that there's a lot of information out on the internet. Individuals like us, other people like David Percy, Jarrah White, all the people who looked into Apollo over the years. We're not talking people who just looked into it for a few days before the 50th anniversary. It's people who've been there 20, 25, 30 years before and have done the research. If NASA are aware of what was being said, their story is coming unglued. We've seen from the Twitter files how Google have been got at by the intelligence services, if that's not an anachronism, to remove information from the internet, to remove certain people from the internet. or the information they're putting out there. They've been removed. That cannot last forever. Once people know the extent of the censorship, which is what it is, they will start to get quite upset and quite angry. Now, as far as Apollo is concerned, that may take a while, because Apollo is such an integral part in the American sense of worth. We put a man on the moon. Most Americans would agree that that is what happened, because they saw it all on television, and they've been told about it interminably for the last 55 years. We put a man on the moon to honor our assassinated president. It's a classic example of one tragic situation reinforcing another. So you've got this dichotomy between what Americans believe, that it all happened the way NASA tells us, and what NASA are now having to confront, that their story was fabricated. It's a fiction. It was created for perfectly sensible political reasons, but it's not relevant anymore. But NASA cannot pull back from the position they've held, because if NASA are seen to have lied, to have fabricated information, there's one immediate question that follows that. What else have they lied about? And that would unravel so much. I mean, we're talking, the major events which you're all aware of, they would unravel.
The one thing that NASA needs to put forward, I've looked at all of the unique materials and inventions that NASA has created. Oh, they're the first in this, they did that, and everything else, right? I mean, if they're so fantastic, why aren't they on the commercial market? I mean, you can go back right to their computers. Why weren't their computers? They're 20 years ahead of everybody else. The other computer companies didn't even exist. And, they had one that could do all of these things. They should have dominated the market, 100%. And it didn't happen. Okay, their insulation, the radiation protection they claim would have been in every nuclear power plant today. Moon rocks that don't absorb radiation. So find out exactly the composition of that and build it in a suit. Put it in your concrete when you're building a nuclear power plant, because it doesn't absorb it. Won't be a problem. I mean, you can powder that down and incorporate it into a polymer and make a suit. Insulation that's less than an inch thick that protects, unbelievable. Why isn't it in our homes? The window glass that they created for all of this stuff. In today's technology, we do have window glass that is very, very strong, but it doesn't protect from radiation. I mean, it's like they're creating stuff for security, bulletproof glass and stuff like that is much thinner than the older stuff for it. That is come along, but it's not coming from NASA. It was coming from other companies that are developing it. So where are all of these products that NASA needed to complete that mission? Why are they not on the commercial market?
Because they never existed. We were told they existed, or it was implied they existed, like the special photographic film that was used in Hasselblad cameras on the lunar surface. Where's that? That doesn't exist. You can't buy that today. You couldn't even buy it 60 years ago. Kodak went bust because they didn't see the digital age coming fast enough. But if they had this special photographic film which could work in space against the effects of vacuum and the effects of radiation, because the two have different effects on photographic film, they would have done very well. All they did was say that they had it. We have this special photographic film which NASA used. Well, where is it? What's special about it? It was a bit thinner than regular film, but that's it. It was regular Ektachrome film. It was regular Triax film, the black and white film. Because NASA tell us these things, but they won't answer the questions that will automatically be generated by their statement. Like the famous scene which David Percy filmed when he was creating What Happened on the Moon, when he interviewed Brian Welch, who was the media representative for NASA. And David went to him, he advised him what he was going to say. He went to him and said, can you explain some of these anomalies in the photographs? That was the question. He's a representative of NASA, media office of NASA. His reply was, We don't have time for this nitpicky claptrap. That's where NASA was coming from. They didn't dare answer the questions. Their PR guys, they ran a very efficient, professional PR office, did NASA, for Apollo. That's why everybody heard about it, because it was promoted by their press office, their PR department, their publicity machine. It was extremely well created and operated very well. But the people who did that for Apollo, they were not around to do the same thing for Artemis, which is why Artemis was such a complete disaster from a PR point of view. If NASA are asked questions which they won't answer, they don't dare answer the question honestly. They have to just deflect you. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. I mean, what a ridiculous response to a reasonable question. Sorry, NASA, you've got to do better. A lot better.
The funny thing is, when they were stating all of this stuff that Artemis is going to do, right? If you've been doing what NASA claims they've been doing for the last 60 years, it should be a piece of cake.
Of course it should. Haven't they got all the documentation? Remember the comment, how do you create all this documentation? With a lady standing beside this pile of computer printouts about 5 foot, 6 foot high. If NASA was faked, how do you create all this paperwork for it? What a stupid question. Of course you created it, because the people creating the paperwork were doing the best job they could. They thought they were going to the moon, so they had to develop all the paperwork to support what their research was. There were thousands of people working for NASA. They all thought they were going to the moon. We all thought we were going to the moon. We saw the rocket take off. Oh, they're going to the moon. And there are many thousands of Americans who said, I had a small piece of that. I helped with a small piece of that. So the idea that you created this huge amount of paperwork if you didn't go to the moon is nonsense. Of course you create the paperwork, and it's perfectly genuine, because none of these so-called conspiracy theorists at NASA could work that one out. Of course they would. Of course all the rockets were real. Of course all the spacesuits were real. Whether they worked or not is another matter.
Well, that's the thing. When you look through the PDF files, you see the testing on it. I suddenly realized that all of these testing of materials, it shows the failure, like when they're testing fuel tanks and everything else. They're showing what the burst pressure is on all of them, but that's not what they needed to get there, because they're actually filling these things up well beyond that. The pressure in the oxygen tank, the little one behind their head, right, is you can see the gauges at 5,500 pounds. You put that in a vacuum chamber and see if it'll hold that 5,500 pounds. I mean, that thing goes off. I think there'd only be maybe from your knees down left when that thing goes off, because it would take more than just your head off. One of the other things that Robert and I were looking at in some of the videos is when they're helping people get dressed and undressed, showing the real suits. The guy's actually hanging a suit up. Now, the suit is around 40 pounds without the helmet, gloves, or boots, right? Just the suit. And he just puts it on a hanger and hangs it up, and there's about 30 other suits on that hanger. Well, if you add it all up, it's going to break the rack. Even James Burke, when he was in a suit, right? And they take the PLSS off of him. And the guy just grabs it and sets it over here. Well, that thing's 140 pounds.
It was a fake one. It was just one for the set. It was one for the show. That's all it was.
Everything is always for the show. Even you see the video of them when they're reconditioning Neil's suit, and the people are working on it. They're just picking it up. These are women. They're just picking the suit up and setting it on the table and working on it. You don't pick 40 pounds up like that. It's not going to happen.
Especially when the fella has one spacesuit and he has it over his arm.
Yeah, you got the video. He just drapes it over his arm like that. You don't pick 40 pounds up like that. And I mean, the weights are there. The PDF files show the actual physical weight of these suits. Like the total suit, boots, helmet, everything else is over 180 pounds.
In that video, it took two technicians to raise the suit like this from the back position up to the seating position. It took two technicians to do that, and that was with the suit pressurized with the gloves, boots, and helmet, everything on. Two guys to move that pressurized suit up. This guy, we were talking about the ISS. And this one fella, he's going, oh yeah, well, 2 people, that's that. Well, you know, these guys, because it's zero gravity, it's easier. I said, really? Well, that's why it takes 2 technicians to help 1 astronaut on the ISS into a spacesuit. They should be able to do that themselves if they're floating around in all that room. Why do you need 2 technicians? Same thing inside of the Apollo LEM. Why do you need 2 technicians to help them to get into the door? And you don't see that when these guys are out ready to go out onto the lunar surface. There's nobody there. Who's going to help them? Does that make sense? 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 Sense?